Snowfall in western New York being measured in feet, not inches.
One of the strongest storms ever recorded.
A relentless snowstorm.
Record rainfall.
Record-breaking rainfall.
With a new UK record temperature.
Earth is increasingly experiencing extreme weather, wreaking havoc across the world, devastating ecosystems, economies, and communities. When catastrophic weather strikes, it's often blamed on climate change. But there are also natural phenomena at work. El Niño and La Niña are opposite states of one of Earth's most important climate processes, the El Niño Southern Oscillation, or ENSO.
These extremes impact people everywhere around the world.
But what is ENSO? How does it work? And what kinds of extreme weather do El Niño and La Niña cause? In the 17th century, Peruvian fishermen noticed periods of unusually warm water in the Pacific Ocean. They called this phenomenon El Niño, the boy in Spanish, named after Jesus, as it occurred around Christmas. It wasn't until the 1960s that meteorologists realised that this was linked to the Southern Oscillation, which refers to changes in atmospheric pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti in the Central Pacific. The two names were combined, and the El Niño Southern Oscillation, or ENSO, was coined.
The key thing about ENSO is that there are three different states. There's a neutral ENSO state, and there are two extreme states, El Niño and La Niña.
ENSO is an interaction between water in the Pacific Ocean and the atmosphere above, measured in changes to sea surface temperatures and atmospheric pressure. But to understand ENSO, you've got to know which way the wind blows. In the neutral phase, winds sweep along the equator from east to west across the Pacific Ocean. These are known as trade winds. They move surface warm water in the same direction, away from South America towards Asia and Australia. The layer of ocean between this surface warm water and cold deep water is called the thermocline. With more surface warm water now in the Western Pacific, the thermocline is pushed down but rises in the east. This leads to a process called upwelling.
Because you're pushing some water away to the west, other water comes up from below, and this water tends to be colder and also richer in nutrients. And that's why you have very rich fisheries off the west coast of South America.
During a neutral phase, sea surface temperatures remain close to their long-term average. These conditions can last for years, but they're broken if they're pushed into one of two intense states, El Niño or La Niña. When this happens, the world is more likely to experience extreme weather.
El Niño is talked about as the warm phase of ENSO. Normally what seems to start off in El Niño is that the trade winds which push the water away from South America weaken.
They stop pushing warm water west. Instead, it remains in the eastern and central Pacific. Those trade winds can even start blowing in the opposite direction, pushing warm water back east towards the west coast of the Americas. The thermocline in the east is pushed deeper and can sometimes completely flatten out.
El Niño basically kind of puts a cap on the upwelling, because as the warm water moves back, it's harder for the cold water to come up. What you find is that the fisheries decrease because the amount of nutrients for the plankton that the fish eat reduces.
No se puede pescar nada porque no hay nada.
¿Por qué no hay nada?
Por las aguas estamos en las temperaturas muy altas.
Definitions vary by country, but generally in the middle of the Pacific, along the equator, in what's known as Niño Region 3.4, sea surface temperatures have to be at least 0.5 degrees Celsius above average to be declared as El Niño. And it has far-reaching effects on ecosystems and livelihoods around the world.
Scientists blame El Niño.
Forecasters now say a so-called Godzilla El Niño could be developing.
They fear that the El Niño will bring yet another season of drought.
Areas in the northern United States and Canada become drier and warmer. Central America is hit by drought. And intense tropical storms also become much more likely on the west coast of the Americas.
You get really quite wet weather in parts of Peru. You get dry weather in parts of Brazil. Because you're moving the warm water towards Latin America and the Pacific, then you are drying out some of Asia. So you're drying out parts of Australia, which might then catch fire. You're drying out Singapore. But it goes beyond that part of the tropics. You can expect to see quite a lot of rain and thus possibly flooding in parts of East Africa, maybe something drier in West Africa.
One of the most severe El Niños in history started in 1997.
Many scientists believe the upcoming El Niño will be even stronger, and some are already calling it in advance the climate event of the century.
It brought devastating drought to Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, while Peru saw heavy rains and floods. The extreme weather associated with this El Niño was the cause of 23,000 deaths worldwide. The damage is estimated to have cost between $60 to $180 billion in today's money. It also led to record global temperatures.
The oceans store up much more heat from global warming than the atmosphere does. And during an El Niño, with more warm water at the surface, that effectively means that more heat can get out of the ocean. And that's why typically El Niño years are warmer worldwide.
But after about 9 to 12 months, this phase of ENSO usually comes to an end.
Effectively, El Niño gets tired. The feedback mechanisms that are holding it together, one or other of them will break down and it will flop back into the neutral phase.
Hi, I'm Oliver Morton. I'm a senior editor at The Economist. If you're enjoying this film, you should know that Economist subscribers get access to a wealth of global analysis on everything from scientific breakthroughs to international politics, from quasars to questions of sport. You can read it, you can listen to it, you can watch it, you can even take part in it at exclusive subscriber webinars. To get a subscription at a really great price, go to the link. And now, back to the film.
Having returned to ENSO neutral, those trade winds blow from east to west. But if they keep getting stronger, they can push ENSO into another extreme, the cool phase, La Niña, or the girl in Spanish. Powerful trade winds now push even more surface warm water west towards Asia. The thermocline becomes shallower in the eastern Pacific, increasing upwelling off the coast of the Americas. More cold, nutrient-rich water is brought to the surface. A La Niña event is generally declared when sea surface temperatures in Niño region 3.4 become 0.5 degrees Celsius colder than average.
La Niña is great if you are fishing for anchovies off Peru because much more upwelling, so more food for fish and so more fish.
So there are silver linings to the extreme states of ENSO. But La Niña is still responsible for plenty of destruction around the world. Hurricanes in the Americas become more likely on the east coast. By early 2023, Earth had been in La Niña for 3 consecutive Northern Hemisphere winters, which is highly unusual for a pattern that normally lasts 9 to 12 months. La Niña was associated with devastating extreme weather events across the globe. Heavy rain led to serious flooding in many countries, from Australia to South Africa. Drought was widespread, with Argentina and China among the places that were hit particularly hard.
We've had a sort of chain of La Niñas now, and I think far and away the biggest human impact has probably been the drought in East Africa, which has threatened the food security of tens of millions of people. You could also point to the floods in Pakistan last year, which fit into a La Niña pattern and were particularly severe.
33 million people were affected, and almost 2,000 lost their lives. Flood damage and economic losses amounted to over $30 billion, 9% of the country's GDP.
The fact that La Niña made the world as a whole a little bit cooler doesn't mean it wasn't very hot in Pakistan, and that meant that the rain clouds could hold more water, and that meant that the floods were particularly intense.
ENSO isn't the only factor causing extreme weather like this. Global warming means glaciers in the north of Pakistan are melting faster, which also contributed to the floods. So the double whammy of climate change and the effects of ENSO can be disastrous.
One of the things that's been striking about this recent La Niña is, despite that cooling effect, the world has been hitting near record temperatures every year for the last few years.
So with La Niña keeping a lid on global temperatures, imagine how hot Earth could get when it moves into the warm phase. But exactly how ENSO is being affected by climate change remains unclear. Since 1950, El Niño and La Niña phases have been getting stronger, leading to more significant changes in sea surface temperatures.
If you look at long-term records of the climate, not human records, but records from the environment, you find that ENSO has been varying for thousands, tens of thousands of years. So it's very, very hard to say that the changes that appear to have happened in ENSO in the last 50 years are definitively due to climate change. When you ask different climate models about what ENSO looks like in a warmer world, some say one thing and some say the other.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said there's no consensus on whether there will be a change in ENSO-related sea surface temperatures in the next century. But the one thing most climate models do agree on is that due to global heating, ENSO's effect on rainfall variability will increase over the east-central tropical Pacific. So with El Niño, this region will see even more rain, whereas during La Niña, it will be drier than usual.
Over a third of the Earth's population lives in the tropics, and they face a climate which changes from year to year with El Niños and La Niñas in ways that other people just don't normally experience. ENSO is a terrible thing for the tropics, but it is at least somewhat predictable. Perhaps the most important thing that the world as a whole can do about ENSO is take it seriously and move resources to the places where they are needed in advance of the weather patterns.
One forecast is certain. ENSO will continue to be one of the most powerful forces to influence Earth's climate.
If you want to know more about El Niño and La Niña, we produced an interactive article on ENSO that shows you more details on how it works. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.